Corey Big Hoss Harrison was supposed to be one of the success stories of Pawn Stars, the son who grew up on camera and inherited a multi-million-dollar business. But in January 2026, everything changed. Photos surfaced of Corey lying in a hospital bed in Mexico, his face swollen, both hands bandaged, and 11 broken ribs after a brutal motorcycle crash that nearly killed him. But here's what makes this story far more unsettling. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a pattern. Years before that crash, there were warning signs. A 2011 arrest after a confrontation with police, a 2023 DUI stop where he refused testing, and reports of a rental RV left with tens of thousands of dollars in damage. Then suddenly, he left the show and disappeared to Mexico. And now, something isn't adding up. Corey says he was dying alone and asked fans for help with medical bills. But his father, Rick Harrison, claims he already covered everything. So why are fans still being asked to pay? What is Big Hoss really running from? And did it finally catch up to him? Stay with us to find out. Corey Harrison said he was dying alone in Mexico. Corey Big Hoss Harrison built his reputation as the steady, no-nonsense son on Pawn Stars. But by early 2026, that image was falling apart in a way no one expected. In January, just days before his father Rick Harrison's wedding to Angie Pelushkin, Corey, 42, was seriously injured in a crash in Tulum, Mexico. The accident left him with 11 broken ribs, a concussion, and internal bleeding, according to a GoFundMe set up by his friend Aaron Chambers. Corey was first taken to a hospital in Playa del Carmen, where he stayed for about 2 weeks. But as the costs quickly climbed, the financial pressure became overwhelming. Against medical advice, he checked himself out and returned home to Tulum, hoping to recover there. Instead, his condition worsened. He was in severe pain and had to call a house doctor, who treated him with IV fluids and morphine. Chambers noted that Corey was hesitant to take strong pain medication, especially after losing his brother Adam to a fentanyl overdose in January 2024, but the pain eventually left him no choice. A few days later, things took a dangerous turn. Corey's oxygen levels dropped to critical levels. At one point, he reportedly told those around him, "I'm just going to die out here. I don't have the money to keep paying these people." Friends decided to transport him more than 4 hours away to a more affordable hospital in Mérida. The journey was tense, with real concern they might not make it in time. Once there, doctors discovered that one of his ribs had completely separated and was pressing into his lung. Surgeons drained nearly 3 liters of blood from his chest and performed 3 emergency procedures to save his life. Corey remained hospitalized for another 18 days. By the time he was discharged, his medical bills had exceeded $100,000. According to Chambers, he had drained his savings and maxed out his credit cards, leaving him with no choice but to ask for help. "Being on television doesn't come with a safety net," Chambers wrote, adding that Corey is still too weak to travel back to the U.S. for further treatment. He described the fundraiser as a lifeline, noting that asking for help wasn't easy for someone as independent as Corey. Corey later told TMZ that he is no longer actively involved with Pawn Stars, though he still receives some residual income from reruns. His father, Rick Harrison, responded briefly, saying Corey is a grown man who is responsible for his own life. At the time of Rick's wedding, Corey was unable to attend. Rick said he had hoped his son would be there as one of his groomsmen, but instead drove to visit him in the hospital, making sure he was okay. What makes this even more unsettling is what came next. A GoFundMe appeared, claiming Corey needed help covering massive medical costs, while also noting he was hesitant to take strong pain medication after losing his brother Adam to a fentanyl overdose in 2024. Fans rushed to support him, but then the story split in two. On March 6th, Corey told TMZ that his father, Rick Harrison, had helped cover about half of the 6-figure hospital bill. Just hours later, Rick told the same outlet something completely different. According to him, he had already paid all of Corey's medical expenses, long before any fundraiser was created. Not half. Everything. And he made one thing very clear. Corey is a grown man, responsible for his own decisions. The contradiction. No one is explaining. There are really two ways to understand what's happening, and neither one has been fully cleared up. The more charitable version is that Rick and Corey are talking about two different things. Rick may have paid the hospital bills directly, while Corey is looking at the bigger picture, the extra costs that came with the ordeal. Medical treatment across multiple hospitals in Mexico isn't one simple invoice. There are follow-up expenses, lost income, recovery costs, and weeks of being unable to work. But there's also a less comfortable reading. A father and son who built their public image on Pawn Stars, the tough love, the business dynamic, are now playing it out in public through conflicting statements, while Corey is still recovering from a life-threatening accident. Corey himself seemed to support both sides at once. "I love my dad to death," he said, "but he doesn't give me shy. My dad's made me work for everything my whole life." At the same time, he admitted Rick had warned him for years to stop riding motorcycles. Rick didn't deny the relationship. He just corrected the numbers. According to him, he had already paid everything, long before any fundraiser was launched. And that leads to the question no one has clearly answered. If the medical bills were already covered, what exactly is the GoFundMe for? The campaign, which raised just under $10,000 toward an $18,000 goal in early March, suggests Corey had drained his savings during recovery and still couldn't work. Even if the hospital was paid, the financial damage didn't stop there. Weeks in recovery, no income, and ongoing living expenses in Mexico can leave a gap that a single payment doesn't fix. Rick's statement doesn't touch any of that. It focuses only on the hospital bill, then ends with a blunt reminder. Corey is a grown man responsible for his own life. That may be true, but it also lands differently when it comes right after your son says he thought he was going to die alone in a foreign country. What the Harrisons have always been. Pawn Stars was built on a simple idea. Rick Harrison didn't hand anything out. He built his business by being tough, controlled, and deliberate. And Corey was always positioned as the son who still had to prove himself before fully stepping into that legacy. On screen, that dynamic worked. It created tension, structure, and a sense of earned respect. But off-screen, it's far more complicated, especially when that same dynamic starts showing up in real life, in something as serious as who paid for the surgeries that kept Corey alive. Corey himself brought emotion into it. When explaining why he hesitated to take morphine, he pointed to the loss of his brother Adam, who died at 39 after years of addiction. Rick had spoken openly about that struggle before, describing it as a painful cycle of rehab, recovery, and relapse. "You try to give him tough love," Rick once said. "I never thought that would happen." That history sits quietly behind everything happening now. Corey survived the crash in Mexico. The GoFundMe is still active. Rick says the medical bills are already paid, but the part no one has clearly answered, and maybe never will, is this. When someone says everything is paid, does that really mean everything is taken care of? Because from the outside, it doesn't quite look that simple. Why Corey Harrison walked away from Pawn Stars. Corey Harrison never officially quit Pawn Stars during its 23-season run. But behind the scenes, he had already made up his mind. If the show returns, he doesn't plan to be part of it. In a February interview, Corey admitted something most fans don't realize. The version of him on TV isn't entirely real anymore. "At this stage, we're all playing a character," he said. "I can't keep playing a 41-year-old version of myself pretending to be 23. After more than a decade on camera, he felt the gap between who he was and who the show needed him to be had become too wide. But this wasn't just about image. It was about timing. Corey made it clear he had been preparing for the end for years. "I'd be stupid not to be prepared," he explained. "I've loved being on the show, but the past few years have been rough. I'm ready to move on." By that point, he wasn't even in talks with the History Channel about renewing his contract. The turning point came when plans for the show's future started shifting. Corey said he was told what direction things were heading, and his response was simple. He was done. "I told them, 'All right, cool, I'll pack it up. I'm moving to Mexico. You guys have fun and do what you want.'" Then he added something that says a lot about the difference between him and his father. "My dad will work until the day he collapses. That's just not me." Not me. And he meant it. Shortly after filming wrapped on season 23 in June 2024, Corey left Las Vegas and relocated to Tulum, Mexico. The move wasn't temporary. It was a complete lifestyle shift. He's even built connections there, saying he became friends with the mayor and that local police often stop by, sometimes just to check in or take photos. It's a far cry from the pawn shop floor where he spent most of his adult life. For Corey, leaving Pawn Stars wasn't a sudden decision. It was the result of years of pressure, change, and a growing sense that it was time to step away. The show made him famous, but it also kept him locked in a version of himself he no longer recognized. The transformation and the trouble that followed. Corey Harrison's journey on Pawn Stars wasn't just about business. It was also about one of the most dramatic physical transformations viewers ever saw on reality TV. At his heaviest, Corey weighed nearly 402 pounds. The wake-up call came when his doctor put him on preventative medication for diabetes. That moment forced him to confront how serious things had become. Instead of ignoring it, he made a decision that changed his life. Corey underwent lap band surgery and completely rebuilt his routine. By 2014, he had dropped to around 210 pounds, losing nearly 200 pounds in total. But what stood out wasn't just the number, it was how his lifestyle changed. He went from struggling with basic movement to training intensely, even boxing up to 12 rounds a day, 5 days a week. For the first time in years, he felt in control of his body again. He even returned to things he had given up long ago. As a teenager, Corey loved snowboarding, but his weight had made it impossible in his 20s. After the weight loss, something as simple as being able to touch his toes became a turning point. It reminded him of who he used to be and pushed him to reclaim that part of his life. But years later, a very different kind of headline followed his name. In 2023, Corey was arrested in Las Vegas on suspicion of DUI. According to reports, police noticed his vehicle drifting between lanes and had to use a loudspeaker to get him to pull over. Officers said there was a strong smell of alcohol and noted his eyes were bloodshot. He was taken into custody after a field sobriety test and later booked into jail, where a blood test was conducted after a breathalyzer wasn't available. Corey, however, told a different version of the story. He claimed he had only had one drink earlier on a flight and said he intended to fight the charges. He was released after about 8 hours. It's a contrast that's hard to ignore. On one side, a man who pushed himself to completely transform his health and reclaim his life. On the other, a series of incidents that suggest something more complicated has been unfolding behind the scenes. From pawn shop kid to reality TV star. Corey Harrison was born on April 27, 1983, into a family where business wasn't just a career, it was a legacy. He grew up as one of 3 sons of Rick Harrison and the grandson of Richard Old Man Harrison, the co-owners of the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas. For Corey, the pawn shop wasn't something he discovered later in life. It was where he was raised. He started working there at just 9 years old, learning the business from the ground up. Over time, that early exposure turned into real responsibility. Corey eventually became the manager of the shop's daily operations, overseeing around 30 employees and handling more purchases than anyone else. But his rise wasn't smooth. On Pawn Stars, much of the tension came from his clashes with his father and grandfather, especially over his decisions, his judgment, and his tendency to take bigger risks on expensive deals. One of the most defining moments came during Season 7 in 2012. Corey pushed back hard, telling Rick and his grandfather that he would leave for another job if he wasn't given a 10% stake in the business. It was a turning point. Instead of walking away, he negotiated a raise and secured a 5% partnership, with the possibility of more in the future. As the show grew, so did his visibility. In 2010, Corey, along with his father, grandfather, and Chumley, was awarded the key to the city of Las Vegas. They later served as grand marshals at a NASCAR event and even made a guest appearance on iCarly. In 2022, he continued expanding his role through Pawn Stars Do America, traveling across the country with the team to buy items from fans. But by 2025, Corey made a major shift. He chose not to renew his contract with the History Channel and left Las Vegas behind. He relocated to Tulum, Mexico, where he began planning a new chapter, developing a barbecue restaurant and stepping away from the life that had defined him for decades. His personal life has been just as eventful. Corey married his high school sweetheart, Charlene, in 2009, but they divorced in 2015. He remarried in 2017 to Karina "Kiki" Harrison, though that relationship ended in 2018. Despite the divorce, the two remained on good terms, and later that year, they welcomed a son, Richard Benjamin Harrison. And when you put everything together, the crash, the conflicting stories, the past struggles, and the decision to walk away from Pawn Stars, it starts to feel like this isn't just a rough chapter, but a turning point in Corey Harrison's life. The real question is this the moment he finally resets everything, or the point where things begin to spiral even further? What do you think is really going on with Big Hoss right now? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep, untold stories like this about Pawn Stars and Rick Harrison's family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.